Hello, my name is Avery, and just 72 hours ago, I was standing in the middle of a chaotic terminal at London Heathrow, clutching a lukewarm espresso and feeling like I had finally conquered the world. After 3 years of relentless 80-hour weeks as a software consultant in Chicago, I'd landed the contract of a lifetime. This was my victory lap. But then, my phone buzzed with a notification that didn't just ruin my morning, it effectively deleted my entire life. It was a text from my mother, Sarah. The tone was so casual, so breezy, it felt like she was telling me about the weather instead of a financial execution. It read, "Hi, honey. We have such amazing news. Lily finally found that gorgeous colonial house in the suburbs she's been dreaming of. The market is so competitive, so we decided to use 60% of your savings to secure the down payment. We knew you'd want to help your sister get a fresh start. We can chat about the repayment details when you're back in the States. Love you." The noise of the airport, the rolling suitcases, the intercom announcements, the frantic chatter suddenly went mute. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. 60%? My savings weren't just a family fund, they were my survival net, my late nights, and my missed holidays. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped my phone as I navigated to my banking app. I logged in, praying she was exaggerating. But when the screen loaded, the air left my lungs. There was no 40% left. There was no safety net. The balance didn't show a fraction of my hard work. It showed a flat, cold, devastating 0.0. They hadn't just borrowed a portion for Lily, they had stripped me bare. Every cent I had sacrificed for since I was 20 years old had been handed over to my sister, the golden child, who had never worked a full-time job in her life. The betrayal felt like ice water in my veins. I didn't call them back. I didn't send an angry text. I knew that if I spoke now, I'd lose my mind. Instead, I walked straight to the ticket counter. I didn't care about my contract or my reputation in London. I used the last remaining credit on my card to book the first flight back to O'Hare International. As I sat on that 10-hour flight, staring out into the dark Atlantic, I wasn't crying. I was planning. They thought they had left me with nothing, but they forgot one thing. I am the one who built that wealth, and I am the only one who knows how to tear it all down. Before I tell you what happened when I walked through the doors of that new house and the look on Lily's face, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing these stories of boundaries and justice. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Now let me tell you why my parents thought they could get away with this. To understand why my parents felt so comfortable reaching into my life and taking whatever they wanted, you have to understand the house I grew up in. We lived in a leafy, upper-middle-class suburb in Naperville, Illinois. On the outside, it was a picture-perfect colonial with a manicured lawn and a porch swing. But inside, there was a hierarchy as rigid as any military unit. My father, Robert, was a man who measured success by the brand of his cigar and the shine on his shoes. My mother, Sarah, was the curator of our family's public image. And then there was Lily. Lily is 2 years younger than me, but in our parents' eyes, she was the sun, and I was just the moon, only useful for reflecting her light. I remember the sensory details of that house like they happened this morning. The heavy, sweet scent of my mother's rosewater perfume always masked the sharp, acrid smell of my father's expensive cigars. I remember the kitchen table, not a cracked one like you'd see in a sad movie, but a high-end mahogany one where every meal felt like a performance. I'd sit on the left, Lily on the right, and my parents at the heads. The pattern started early. If Lily wanted a new dress for a dance, I was told my soccer cleats from last year were still good. If Lily failed a math test, it was because the teacher was unfair. If I got an A-, Robert would look over his glasses and ask why it wasn't an A. I was the reliable one, the one who didn't need help, the one who could figure it out. The most defining moment happened when I was 18. I had spent 4 years working part-time at a local diner, saving every tip and paycheck for my college fund. My parents had promised to match whatever I saved. But 2 weeks before my freshman orientation at the University of Chicago, Sarah sat me down in the living room. I can still see her face, perfectly composed, not a single hair out of place. She told me that Lily's emotional health was a priority, and Lily wanted to spend a gap year traveling through Europe to find herself. They had taken my entire college savings to fund her trip. When I protested, Robert didn't even look up from his financial journals. He just said, "Family first, Avery. You're smart. You'll find a way. Lily needs this more." That was the math of my childhood. My needs were always a variable that could be solved later, while Lily's wants were a constant that had to be satisfied immediately. I ended up taking out massive student loans and working 3 jobs while Lily was posting photos from cafes in Paris. I became a master at survival because my parents made sure I had no other choice. They viewed my resilience not as a trait to be admired, but as a resource to be exploited. Because I always found a way, they assumed I would never run out of ways. They mistook my silence for agreement and my success for an open checkbook. They didn't realize that every time they said family first to justify hurting me, they were slowly teaching me that I wasn't actually part of their definition of family. I learned that in their world, family first actually meant Lily first, and everyone else, especially me, was just a bridge for her to walk on. When I graduated from college with a mountain of debt and zero help from my parents, I didn't spend a single day feeling sorry for myself. I didn't have that luxury. While Lily was finding herself at music festivals and beach resorts, funded by Sarah and Robert, I was learning the brutal math of survival in Chicago. My early 20s weren't a series of parties. They were a blur of caffeine and exhaustion. I worked 2 lives. By day, I was a junior analyst at a tech firm, buried under spreadsheets and the sterile hum of data centers. By night, from 4 a.m. until my shift started, I was the head baker at a small shop in Lincoln Park. The sensory details of those years are burned into my memory. I lived with the permanent scent of yeast and flour clinging to my hair, even when I was sitting in high-level board meetings. My hands were always a map of my labor, blistered from heavy trays in the morning and cramped from coding late into the night. I lived in a studio apartment so small that I could practically touch both walls if I stretched my arms out. The radiator hissed like a dying animal every winter, and I slept on a mattress I'd found at a clearance sale. But I had a goal. Every single dollar was accounted for. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't go out for drinks. I watched my bank balance grow, cent by cent, until it became a 5-figure number, and then finally 6. That money wasn't just savings. It was my freedom. It was the proof that I didn't need the family-first support system that had failed me so many times. My parents, of course, saw the result but chose to ignore the process. They saw me move into a nicer apartment in the Gold Coast. They saw me buy a reliable car and dress in professional blazers. To them, my success wasn't something I had bled for. It was just a fact of nature. They began to talk about my wealth as if it were a communal well they could draw from whenever Lily had a crisis, which was often. Robert would lean back at the dinner table, swirling his wine, and say, "Avery, it's so good you're doing well. It gives us peace of mind knowing the family has a safety net." He never asked how many hours of sleep I'd lost to build that net. He just assumed that because I was the strong one, I had an infinite capacity to absorb their burdens. They didn't see my bank account as my future. They saw it as Lily's backup plan. They were already spending my money in their heads long before they actually stole it. The promotion came on a Tuesday in October. I remember the air in Chicago was crisp, smelling of fallen leaves and the lake. My boss called me into the corner office and told me I was being sent to London for a high-stakes 3-month contract. It wasn't just a job, it was a career maker. I walked out of that building feeling like the heavy iron chains of my past had finally snapped. That night, I did something I rarely did. I went to my parents' house for dinner to share the news. I thought, maybe, after seeing me reach this level, they would finally look at me with respect, instead of just seeing a source of stability. Sarah had prepared a roast, and the house smelled like rosemary and comfort. Robert actually uncorked a bottle of expensive red wine. For a few hours, it felt like a real family. Lily was there too, unusually quiet, her eyes darting between my mother and her phone. "We are so proud of you, Avery," my mother said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that should have made me suspicious. "You're going so far away. We'll miss you." "And who is going to look after things here?" Robert asked, leaning back in his chair. He didn't mean my apartment or my car. He meant the family safety net. "I have everything handled," I told them. But a small, cautious part of me, the part that remembered the empty college fund and the broken soccer cleats, told me to be careful. I knew they had my bank details from a time I'd helped them with a mortgage application. I also knew they wouldn't hesitate to use them if they felt Lily's needs were pressing. So I made a move. I told them I was setting up a family emergency account for the 3 months I was away. I told them I'd put a significant portion of my savings there, just in case something happened to the house or Robert's health. I saw the way Sarah's eyes lit up. I saw the way Lily stopped scrolling her phone. What I didn't tell them was that this account was a decoy. I had moved 90% of my actual wealth into a protected blind trust and a high-yield business investment account they couldn't even see, let alone touch. The account I gave them access to had just enough to look like a life savings to someone who didn't know my true salary. It was a test, a $50,000 test of their loyalty. As I drove to O'Hare the next morning, watching the Chicago skyline shrink in my rearview mirror, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. I wanted to trust them. I wanted them to pass the test. But deep down, as the plane lifted off the runway, I knew that for Sarah, Robert, and Lily, family first only worked one way. London is famous for its gray, oppressive skies. But that afternoon, the fog felt like a physical weight against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my high-rise office in Canary Wharf. I had just walked out of a meeting where the senior partners had practically handed me a permanent director role. I was on top of the world. My career was skyrocketing, and for the first time in my life, I felt untouchable. Then, my phone chimed on the mahogany desk. A text from Sarah. Reading it was like watching a slow-motion car crash. She didn't lead with, "How are you?" or "Are you enjoying London?" She led with Lily's happiness. "Lily is crying tears of joy, Avery. The house in the suburbs is perfect. It has the white picket fence she always wanted. We used your savings for the down payment today. We knew you'd understand. It's a fresh start for her. Family helps family, honey." I didn't reply. My thumb hovered over my banking app, my heart beginning to thud against my ribs with a sickening rhythm. I logged in, my face reflected in the dark screen of the phone, looking pale and ghostly in the office lights. I expected to see the $50,000 I'd left in that emergency account reduced to $20,000. I expected them to have taken exactly the 60% they claimed in their twisted family-first logic. But when the screen loaded, the number staring back at me wasn't $20,000. It wasn't even $2,000. It was a flat, cold, devastating $0. They hadn't just borrowed what they needed for a down payment. They had looked at the balance, seen every single cent I had intentionally placed there as a test of their loyalty, and they had swept it clean. They had gutted the account like vultures. They didn't even leave me enough money for a taxi to the airport. The rage that filled me wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. It was a freezing, paralyzing realization that to Sarah and Robert, I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't a human being with dreams and needs. I was a vault. I was a rainy day fund for their favorite child. While I was working through the night in London, they were sitting in a comfortable realtor's office in Chicago, signing away my sweat, my late nights, and my missed sleep for a house Lily would probably lose interest in within 6 months. The math of my childhood had returned with a vengeance. Lily gets the house, I get the bill. Lily gets the praise, I get a casual text message. But as I stood there, overlooking the Thames, I realized they had made a fatal error. They thought that account was my everything. They thought they had finally broken me, leaving me stranded and penniless in a foreign country. They had no idea that the digital dagger they just plunged into my back was actually the key to their own downfall. Before I tell you about the flight back and the chilling silence that followed, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps me share these stories of boundaries and survival. Have you ever had a family member borrow something and never return it? Tell me your story in the comments below. Now let's get on that plane. The flight from London to Chicago is roughly 8 hours, but when your entire life has been liquidated by the people who were supposed to protect it, those 8 hours feel like an eternity trapped in a pressurized metal tube. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that 0.00 balance. I felt the dry, recycled air of the cabin scratching at my throat, and the hum of the jet engines seemed to vibrate in sync with the cold fury radiating from my chest. I spent most of the flight staring at the tiny digital airplane on the seatback screen, watching it crawl across the vast, dark Atlantic. Around me, people were sleeping under thin blankets or watching rom-coms, oblivious to the fact that the woman in 14B was mentally dismantling a family. The flight attendants offered me plastic trays of stale food and lukewarm water, but I couldn't swallow. My stomach was a knot of pure ice. I kept thinking about the math, not just the money, but the years, the thousands of hours of overtime, the missed birthdays, the blisters on my hands from the bakery, and the strained eyes from the code. All of it had been converted into a down payment for a sister who wouldn't know a hard day's work if it hit her in the face. My mother, Sarah, and my father, Robert, hadn't just stolen my money. They had tried to steal my time. They had tried to tell me that my life was secondary to Lily's comfort. But as we began our descent into O'Hare International, a strange calm settled over me. It was the same clarity I felt when a complex piece of software finally compiled without errors. I realized they had fallen into the trap I'd set months ago. They saw the family emergency account as a jackpot, never questioning why I'd leave so much vulnerable. They were so blinded by their greed for Lily that they didn't realize they had just signed their own financial death warrants. When the wheels hit the tarmac with a jarring thud, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like an architect. The cold Chicago wind hit me the moment I stepped out of the terminal, biting through my light coat, but I welcomed it. It felt honest. I didn't go to my apartment. I didn't go to a hotel. I hailed a ride and gave the driver an address in the suburbs of Naperville. I was going to the house my money had bought. I was going to see the dream they had built on top of my nightmare, and I was going to make sure they understood that some foundations are built to be demolished. The Uber dropped me off at a pristine cul-de-sac in Naperville. The street was lined with houses that looked like they belonged in a catalog, perfectly manicured lawns, black shutters, and expensive wreaths on every front door. My parents and Lily were in the center house, a modern farmhouse style with a sprawling porch. I stood on the curb for a moment, the cold wind biting at my neck, staring at a property that my sweat, my 80-hour weeks, and my missed holidays had paid for. I didn't knock. I pushed the front door open, and the scent of fresh paint and expensive vanilla candles hit me like a physical blow. Inside, it was a celebration. There were balloons tied to the staircase and the sound of a cork popping in the kitchen. Lily was standing in the middle of the vaulted living room, wearing a designer dress and holding a glass of Moët. She looked at me, and for a split second, she looked surprised. But the surprise quickly curdled into a smirk, the same arrogant look she'd used since we were kids to let me know she'd won. "Avery," my mother, Sarah, exclaimed, rushing toward me with a peacekeeper's smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're back so soon. We thought you were staying in London for months." "I was," I said, my voice as cold as the ice in the Thames. "Until I saw my bank balance. Where is my money, Mom?" Robert walked into the room from the patio, holding a glass of whiskey. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed, like I was interrupting a private party. "Don't start a scene, Avery. We did what was best for the family. Lily needed a fresh start after her last setback. You're successful. You're the strong one. You can make more." "That wasn't yours to decide," I snapped. Lily took a slow sip of her champagne, her eyes scanning me with pure mockery. "Oh, please, Avery, stop being so dramatic. You've always been the lonely, miserable workaholic. What were you going to do with all that money anyway? Buy another computer? She laughed, a sharp metallic sound that filled the room. Look at this place. I finally have what I deserve, and the best part, you paid for it. She stepped closer to me, her voice dropping to a whisper that dripped with venom. You're just a bank to us, Avery. A human ATM, and now, you don't even have a single penny left to your name. You're broke. You're nothing. So why don't you go back to your little office and leave the real family to celebrate? Sarah nodded in agreement. Honey, your sister needed us more. She had to have this house to keep her reputation. You understand? Don't you? I looked at their faces. Sarah's feigned concern, Robert's defensive posture, and Lily's triumphant grin. They truly believed they had stripped me of my power. They thought they had left me with nothing but a return ticket and a broken spirit. But then, a low, quiet sound started in my chest. I burst out laughing. It wasn't a sad laugh, and it wasn't the laugh of someone who had lost their mind. It was the laugh of a woman who had just seen her enemies walk directly into the center of a trap she'd been building for years. The laughter echoed through the vaulted ceiling of Lily's new living room, sharp and jagged, like breaking glass. My mother froze, the smile on her face twitching. My father lowered his whiskey glass, his brow furrowed in confusion. Lily just stared at me, her champagne glass trembling slightly. "What's so funny, Avery?" Lily spat, her voice rising in defensive anger. "You've lost everything. You should be crying on the floor, begging us for a place to stay." I wiped a stray tear of laughter from my eye and took a step toward the mahogany kitchen island, the one my money had supposedly paid for. You really think I'm that stupid, don't you? You think after years of watching you drain my college fund, steal my childhood opportunities, and treat me like a backup plan, I'd just leave my entire life's work in a basic savings account? I pulled a slim, leather-bound folder from my laptop bag. I didn't rush. I wanted them to feel the weight of the silence. I thought about the many stories I've heard, like the one about the girl whose parents left her at an orphanage only to come crawling back when she was successful. My parents were the same. They only saw me when I had something they wanted. "The account you drained," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm, "was what I call my loyalty audit account. I opened it 6 months ago. I intentionally used the old login credentials I knew you had saved on the family computer. I even labeled it Emergency Family Fund, just to see if you could resist the urge to steal from me one last time." Sarah's face went pale. "Avery, we didn't steal. We helped your sister. You took $50,000 that didn't belong to you, Mom. But here's the part you didn't check." I slid a document across the marble countertop. That account wasn't a standard savings. It was a structured private loan account. By accessing those funds without a signed authorization for a specific emergency, you didn't just withdraw money. You triggered a high-interest, short-term commercial loan agreement that I had preset with my bank's legal department. Robert grabbed the paper, his eyes scanning the fine print. "This says 30% interest, compounded weekly?" "Exactly," I smiled. "And since the funds were moved into an asset, this house, the bank has already placed a primary lien on the property. You didn't buy Lily a house with my savings. You just turned her into a high-risk debtor to a bank that has no family-first policy." Lily's jaw dropped. The champagne glass finally slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. "But that's not the best part," I continued, enjoying the way the air seemed to leave the room. "You think you left me with nothing. My real wealth, the 90% you couldn't find, is locked in a blind trust in Austin, Texas. It's managed by a third-party firm that requires biometric verification. You couldn't touch it even if you had my social security number and a gun to my head." I looked at my mother, who was now clutching the back of a chair to keep from falling. "I knew you'd do this. I hoped you wouldn't, but I knew. You saw me as a human ATM, as Lily so eloquently put it. But you forgot that an ATM is just a machine, and eventually the machine stops dispensing cash when the account holder decides to cut off the power." The mockery was gone. the celebration was dead. In its place was the cold, hard realization that the strong one had finally fought back. The air in the living room was thick with a new kind of silence, one that felt like the heavy ionized air right before a lightning strike. Robert's hand was visibly shaking as he held the loan agreement. Sarah was staring at the marble countertop as if she expected it to open up and swallow her whole. And Lily? Her face had gone from triumphant to a sickly shade of gray. This can't be legal," Robert stammered, his voice lacking its usual booming authority. "You're our daughter, Avery. You can't just set a trap for your own father." "I didn't set a trap, Robert," I said, and for the first time, I didn't call him Dad. The word felt too heavy, too sacred for the man standing in front of me. "I set a boundary. You were the one who decided to break into it. You see, when you logged into that account using my credentials from your home computer in Naperville, you didn't just make a withdrawal. You committed federal bank fraud." I reached back into my folder and pulled out a stack of logs, technical data showing the IP address of their home, the exact timestamp of the transfer, and a digital signature that didn't belong to me. "You used my identity to authorize a transfer to a real estate holding company," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "In the eyes of the law, this isn't a family dispute. It's identity theft. It's unauthorized access to a protected financial system. It's a felony. And because the amount exceeds $10,000, we're talking about potential prison time, not just a fine." Sarah gasped, her hand going to her throat. "Prison? Avery, how can you even say that? We're your parents. We gave you everything." "You gave me a folding chair at the kitchen table while Lily got the mahogany," I snapped back, the decades of repressed anger finally sharpening into a single point. "You gave me the bill for my college while Lily got a tour of Europe. And now you've given me the evidence I need to put you away." I turned my gaze to Lily, who was clutching her designer dress as if it could protect her. "And you. You wanted this dream life so badly that you didn't care whose blood was on the floorboards. Well, here is your choice. One choice. You have exactly 48 hours to put this house on the market as an emergency sale. You will return every single cent you took, plus the 30% interest penalty triggered by the unauthorized access. You will sign a legal confession stating that the funds were accessed without my permission." "And if we don't?" Lily hissed, a desperate spark of her old arrogance flickering for a second. "If you don't," I said, leaning in until I could see the panic in her pupils, "I walk out of this door and drive straight to the FBI field office in Chicago. I have the logs, I have the forged signature, I have the proof of the house purchase. I will file the report, and the bank will start the foreclosure process before you can even pack your bags. You won't just lose the house, Lily. You'll lose your freedom. And Mom and Robert, they'll be right there in the cell next to you for conspiracy." The house of cards didn't just fall, it disintegrated. Sarah began to sob, not the fake, manipulative tears I'd seen 1,000 times, but the jagged, ugly sobs of a woman who realized she had finally gambled away her last chip. Lily collapsed onto the expensive sofa, staring at the floor. The dream home they had stolen felt like a cage. Before I tell you about the final document I made them sign and where I went after I walked out of that house, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. It's the best way to support the channel. Do you think Avery is being too harsh, or is this finally justice? Let me know in the comments. They didn't fight me. They couldn't. When the threat of federal prison is staring you in the face, the family-first facade evaporates pretty quickly. The house in Naperville was listed as an emergency sale the very next day. It sold for less than what they'd paid, and every single cent, along with the 30% interest penalty I'd baked into the trap, was wired back into my protected account. I watched the notification pop up on my phone as I sat in the airport, waiting for my flight to Austin, Texas. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I just felt a profound sense of weightlessness, as if I had finally cut the anchor that had been dragging me toward the bottom of the ocean for 27 years. I didn't stay in Chicago to watch them pack. I didn't want to hear Sarah's pleas or see Lily's tears. I blocked their numbers before the plane even left the tarmac. Moving to Austin wasn't just a career move, it was a total rebirth. I started my own independent tech consultancy firm, and within 6 months, I had more clients than I could handle. I remember the first morning in my new office. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Colorado River, and the air smelled of high-end espresso and the crisp, clean scent of expensive leather furniture. It was the smell of a life I had built with my own hands, without permission and without apologies. There's a specific kind of silence in a home that is truly yours, a silence that isn't lonely, but peaceful. No heavy cigar smoke, no rosewater perfume masking a lie, and no one asking me to figure something out for someone else's benefit. As for my parents and Lily, the last I heard through a distant cousin, they are living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. Lily is working a retail job she hates, complaining to anyone who will listen that I ruined her life. Robert and Sarah are facing the financial reality of their own greed. They gambled my future to give Lily a dream she hadn't earned, and they ended up losing everything. The math finally added up, but for the first time, I wasn't the one paying the bill. I looked at the sunset over the Austin skyline and realized that I hadn't just saved my money, I had saved myself. I sit here today in my office in Austin, looking out at the skyline, and I realize something fundamental that I wish I'd known when I was that 8-year-old girl with the cracked table and the blue fence. People often weaponize the phrase family first to justify the most toxic betrayals. They use it as a lock to keep you in a room where they are the only ones allowed to breathe. But the truth I've learned, the hard, expensive, $50,000 truth, is that family isn't a biological debt you owe for the rest of your life. It's a reciprocal bond built on respect, and if the respect isn't there, the bond doesn't exist. My parents and Lily thought they could use my resilience as a fuel for their greed forever. They mistook my strength for an open checkbook. But by walking away and choosing my own life, I didn't just save my money, I saved my dignity. I'm no longer the reliable one who suffers in silence. I'm the woman who knows exactly what she is worth, and I won't let anyone, not even the people who brought me into this world, tell me otherwise. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this journey. Your support means everything to me. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own future, please share your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next story of justice and boundaries. Take care of yourselves.